This is every single fight to make after UFC 287, Pereira versus Adesanya 2. I've got all of the key fighters from that card on the screen right now. Some winners, some losers, and you may notice there is an empty box next to all of them, and that's where their next opponent's going to go, who I have hidden around the perimeter of the screen. I'll slowly reveal those opponents one by one as the video goes on and place them where they belong on the screen. Let's start straight away with the winner of the main event. Israel Adesanya scored a vicious highlight reel KO over Alex Pereira, and according to him, he doesn't want a trilogy. So he said massively no to a trilogy against Alex Pereira. He just needed that one win, and that's good enough for him, I guess. But who knows, maybe they'll meet each other down the line. I think a little bit of space between that potential trilogy between them could be good to build up a narrative, because who knows, I'm not trying to reveal what I'm going to do with Alex Pereira in a second, but he could move up to light heavyweight, get a couple of wins, Adesanya moves up, challenges for the belt, and all of a sudden there's a narrative like, what if Adesanya gets the belt at light heavyweight and Pereira is his contender? That could be a little bit better to build up the trilogy. So, in the meantime, Khamzat Chimaev should be next for Israel Adesanya. There's no other middleweight on the roster that makes any sense for Israel Adesanya to fight other than Alex Pereira in a trilogy. There isn't one. There's not a single one. Robert Whittaker's lost to him twice. Regardless what you think about the second fight's decision, I thought Whittaker won, but who cares? He's lost to him twice. Jared Cannonier just lost to him. Marvin Vettori has lost to him twice. Dricus du Plessis is terrible and won't beat Israel Adesanya. Like, this is the issue that we have in the middleweight division right now. And outside of that, you're really getting a bit slim with your options on who you want to give a title shot to, because you kind of can't give anyone a title shot inside the top 5. So, move Chimaev up. I've been hearing Chimaev talk a whole bunch of nonsense for far too long without fighting anyone. So Israel Adesanya, you took no damage. If there is going to be a pay-per-view in August, let it be headlined by Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev. That's the plan. We know Chimaev's moving up to middleweight. We were talking about maybe there's going to be a Paulo Costa matchup or something along those lines. I say forget all of that talk. We need a contender for Israel Adesanya that makes some sense. And I think Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya would be like an even odds fight. I could even see Chimaev being a favorite. I could see them making him a favorite in that matchup. Now, do I believe that maybe Israel Adesanya has a better chance than some people would give him credit for? Yes. But it's a very dangerous matchup. It's a fresh matchup as well against a dangerous man that people kind of assume could beat all of the top welterweights anyway. Let's move him up and give him a title shot at middleweight, because there's no one else there right now. And this would be an amazing headliner. Plus, Israel Adesanya, before the Pereira fight, his fame was rapidly dropping off. Rapidly dropping off. People weren't really liking him. I wasn't liking him. People were getting sick of his build-up of the fight, and then it would be like a 5-round leg-kicking decision. Let's make the most out of this sudden re-emergence of popularity behind Israel Adesanya because of his amazing 2 performances. Even when he lost to Pereira, it was a fun fight. He just had a great performance, a great highlight reel KO. His name, I believe, right now is the biggest it's ever been in his entire career. Make the most of it and put him against Khamzat Chimaev while we can still market Chimaev as an undefeated monster and a nightmare-style matchup for Israel Adesanya. Let's get the fight made. I'm sick of Chimaev's talking on the sidelines. Put him in there against a championship fight in Israel Adesanya. We move on to another fight on the card, or a fighter on the card. Alex Pereira lost in the main event against Israel Adesanya. He's going to need a little bit of time off. He's going to need to move up in weight. I think anyway. He's draining a bit too much. We've seen it in his last 2 fights with Israel Adesanya. Listen, say what you want about Adesanya's KO power. You know, Cannonier weren't getting rocked by shots. I know that Adesanya threw the perfect punch, but there's clearly something to Alex Pereira getting rocked and put away like that, especially when he got rocked by Israel Adesanya in the first round as well, where that's not going to be too good for his brain health. So I don't want him to get KO'd like that. And then a couple of months later, 5 months later, he makes the cut down to middleweight again. It just doesn't make sense health-wise for him. So, if he wants to make the most out of his career, at quite an old age, which he is at 35, move him up to light heavyweight. He's already won the belt at middleweight. He can try and gain new legacy in the light heavyweight division against the winner of Anthony Smith versus Johnny Walker, which I do believe is going to be Anthony Smith. It could well be Johnny Walker, in which case I think it would make a much more interesting matchup. They could do it in Brazil as a fight night headliner. That would make absolute sense. Alex Pereira, Anthony Smith, I think he beats Walker, but I'm not too sure yet. But that's coming up at the start of May. So I think just schedule-wise, it makes sense. I don't want Jan Blachowicz to wait another 6 months to fight Alex Pereira. I don't want Ankalaev to wait around another 6 months. You've got to have someone who's in the top of the division, who's got a fight coming up soon that we know of, so it makes sense schedule-wise. I don't want to make people wait around, and I don't want Pereira to like rush back in there after such a bad KO loss. So we do Alex Pereira out for 5 or 6 months. At the start of May, in a month, Anthony Smith's fighting Johnny Walker. Remake it the main event, please, because it's better than Rosenstruik versus Almeida. And then we can set up a fight down the line, maybe in Brazil as a fight night headliner. Make the most out of Pereira's name and do him against a top 5 light heavyweight in the winner of Smith versus Walker. And if he wins that one, we can do him versus the loser of Jamal Hill versus Yuri Prohaska. And who knows, if Adesanya gets past Chimaev, we can do him versus the winner. And who knows, we could see a light heavyweight trilogy between the two of them down the line. That would be mental. We move on to another fight on the card. Gilbert Burns won in the co-main event. Obviously, I'm not going to match up Jorge Masvidal. He's not going to be fighting anymore. But I could see a Mike Perry matchup happening at BKFC down the line. Never say never. But Gilbert Burns won in the co-main event. Didn't really take too much damage. Probably going to be looking to get back in there. He said he's going to wait for a title shot. So I'm trying to think about this from a business standpoint. The UFC ain't going to let him wait for a title shot. That's just not going to happen. They're not going to say, okay, Gilbert Burns, you're such a huge name. We'll give you anything you want right now. He'll be number 4 in the rankings. Maybe number 3 when Chimaev moves up. Who knows if he does get removed from the welterweight rankings. But let's do Gilbert Burns versus Belal Muhammad. I think it makes all the sense in the world. Neither of them are huge names. Belal Muhammad especially not. Let's do them versus each other. And here's the way you bait Gilbert Burns into taking it. You say, hey, Gilbert Burns, I know you want a title shot. You also said you wanted to be a backup for the main event of Edwards versus Covington in London in July. So clearly he's looking to be active and get right back into a training camp. He said he wanted to be a backup. Here's what you do. Gilbert Burns, Belal Muhammad, on that July pay-per-view card of UFC 291 in London, and you say, hey, Burns, fight Belal Muhammad on this card. We'll give you a pay bump. We'll give Belal Muhammad a bit of a pay bump as well in the meantime, because it is a big fight that people are going to be interested in on a big card on a pay-per-view. And say, you know what? If anything happens in the main event, Gilbert Burns, we want you on the card to be there. You're our short notice replacement to take anyone's spot in the main event. So instead of doing a training camp for who knows who you're going to be fighting in the main event, Edwards or Covington, depending on who pulls out, do a training camp for someone you know you'll probably be fighting in Belal Muhammad. And if anything happens to the main event, you're going to be in shape anyway. So be there on that July pay-per-view card. And that's how you meet Burns in the middle with his demands. You don't say, forget Burns, we ain't doing anything with Burns. You say, all right, you're making really egregious demands here, but we'll meet you in the middle. You can be the backup, but you got to fight Belal Muhammad on that card for a title shot. And you got to kind of promise him, if you do beat Belal Muhammad, or if Belal Muhammad beats you, to both of them, you'll get a title shot in the welterweight division no matter what. And we can build it up by doing a press conference with those two on the card. Hopefully Dana White doesn't ruin it with no cross-fight trash talk again. That policy he's reinstated or instated in general. We move on to the feature fight of the card. Rob Font, turn back the clock. Y'all must have forgot, apparently. I definitely did. He smoked Adrian Yanez. And I'm thinking, hey, get back in there. He's not any younger. He still took a bit of damage in that fight, so maybe a little bit of time off. Couple of weeks, maybe something like that. But I'm thinking he needs to get back in there around August, 4 months from now. And I think he needs to get back in there against Piotr Jan. I know people want Jan versus Vera. I'm not interested in that fight with both of them coming off a loss. I've organised a semi-finals tournament here. Okay, to get Jan or Vera back to the top, or to get some of these up-and-coming contenders back to the top. I want Jan versus the winner of Font versus Yanez. Font is now that person. And I want Vera to take a bit of time and fight the winner of Song Yudong versus Ricky Simone. Then the winners of those two individual matchups, Yan versus Font and Vera versus Song Yudong, who I think is going to win that matchup, the winners of those can fight each other, and the winner of that will get a title elimination bout at the top of the division. That's what I think should happen next. Rob Font versus Piotr Yan could be a fight night main event, maybe in August. Perfect main event of a fight night, in the Apex especially. But it also could be a great addition to a main card of a pay-per-view. Who knows? I'm already seeing a great August pay-per-view card with Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev at the top, and then maybe a Rob Font versus Piotr Yan on the card as well to open it up. And put whatever you want between it. That's going to be a great card sandwiched between those two matchups. We move on to another fighter. Kevin Holland won against Santiago Ponzinibbio. He's going to need a little bit of time off. Someone else who took a lot of damage recently in his recent fight, which was potentially a Fight of the Year candidate against Shavkat Rakhmonov, is Jeff Neal. I think this is a matchup that we need to run back. And before you say, what do you mean run back? They haven't fought each other. They have. On the regional scene, Kevin Holland KO'd Jeff Neal at welterweight. Let's run it back. You know why? It's a perfect way to bait a ranked contender to take on Kevin Holland. Other than Neil Magny, who we kind of seem to lose to so many people, and this is a win-win. If Neil Magny, I wanted to do Neil Magny versus Kevin Holland, but if Neil Magny wins, it's like, hey, Neil Magny, everyone. You know what I mean? You don't want that. Whereas if Holland beats Magny, it's like, oh, well, he beat Magny. If you do this matchup, it's a win-win. Whoever wins this matchup is right back on track with a ton of hype behind him. If Holland wins, he just beat Jeff Neal. That's a sick win to have. If Jeff Neal wins, he gets the spotlight of being against Kevin Holland on the main card of a pay-per-view somewhere, maybe in August as well, who knows, and he's right back on track in his career as well. Great matchup, plus Jeff Neal will be enticed to take this matchup because I'm sure he wants to right that wrong because he was beaten up on Kevin Holland before getting TKO'd on the regional scene. And for Holland, it's good leverage to get yourself back in the rankings because you beat this guy before. Perfect matchup in the welterweight division, I believe, and their schedules are very similar. In August, that's what I'm looking at. Moving on, Christian Rodriguez beat Raul Rosas Jr., destroyed the hype train of Raul Rosas Jr., another fighter that fought recently at bantamweight that has a ton of steam behind him. Cameron Simon, South African fighter, of course trains with Dricus du Plessis, had a good win in his last outing against Mana Martinez, I believe it was, had a decent win with a lot of controversy in there as well. Christian Rodriguez is going to have a bit of hype behind him, the most hype he's ever had in his career. That was a big statement win from him against a big prospect in Raul Rosas. Keep him active. Cameron Simon wants to be active. He was talking about coming back in June. I'm saying International Fight Week, on the prelims, Christian Rodriguez versus Cameron Simon opens up the prelims. Not the early prelims, the proper prelims. Christian Rodriguez, Cameron Simon, they both got a bit of steam on them right now at the bottom of the bantamweight division. Let's put them against each other so that we can carry on at least one of those prospects at bantamweight next. I think that's a perfect matchup to make. Rodriguez took no damage. Simon's looking to get back in there. He wanted June. Let's delay it by a month. Say come back on International Fight Week and we'll put those two against each other somewhere on the prelims. Makes sense to me. We move on to another matchup, which was Kelvin Gastelum. He took on Chris Curtis. Had a great win. Reinvented himself, in my opinion. Looked really, really good. Turned back the clock again. Just like Rob Font. There were a few of those types of matchups on the card. Roman Dolidze in the middleweight division. It makes sense. He just fought Marvin Vettori on a recent card. I can't remember what card it was, but I think it was in March at some point. I can't quite remember. It must have been at UFC 286. It was. On the main card of UFC 286, Edwards versus Usman 2 in London. So, similar schedules. Gastelum's going to want a little bit of time off. I'm sure Dolidze's going to want a little bit of time off as well. Not too much, but this is a perfect matchup. You don't want Kelvin Gastelum to start beating loads of contenders again. You want to do this matchup so that Roman Dolidze can get right back on track because he's pretty old himself, or Kelvin Gastelum can get right back in the mix and start looking for top 10 opponents after this one. So I think it's a great matchup. Gastelum, Dolidze, perfect fight, similar schedules, similar timelines. August, again, Maybe on that pay-per-view I'm talking about, Adesanya Chimaev main event, co-main event, a title fight of any kind, any variation. Maybe Moreno. I know the Adesanya-Moreno pairing is pretty good because they like each other and similar fan bases, 12-year-olds. So put Moreno versus Pantoja 2 in the co-main. If they're not going to be on that Canada pay-per-view card, who knows? And then you put Font versus Yan on the card, Gastelum versus Dolidze on the card, Kevin Holland versus Jeff Neal on the card. That's a sick main card of a pay-per-view. Take my money. We move on to another fighter on the card who won, Joe Pifer. Great win over Gerald Meerschaert. Not the most interesting matchup I've got for him, but he called him out, and I understand why he called him out. I wanted him to fight this guy before he fought Meerschaert. Dustin Stoltzfus. Joe Pifer's a good prospect, but it's middleweight, and he's very young. We know what happens to middleweight prospects when they try and rise through the rankings. Unless they're Israel Adesanya, I guess, they always seem to lose. Okay? So let's take our time with this one. He's 26. 26 years old. He's got so much time left. He wants to be active. Joe Pifer, Dustin Stoltzfus. Stoltzfus is injured right now, but I'm sure he'll be recovered soon and ready to go soon. I say put that on International Fight Week prelims and August pay-per-view prelims that I was just speaking about. Make that matchup happen. Joe Pifer, Dustin Stoltzfus. Stoltzfus beat him on the Contender Series and shattered his arm in so many different places. And it put Pifer out for years of his career. And he called him out in his post-fight interview and said he wants it. It's personal. He wants to right that wrong in his career. And I don't mind pausing things for a little bit on Pifer, giving him another chance. And then we can start looking at a Chris Curtis type matchup down the line. Joe Pifer, Dustin Stoltzfus 2, the rematch. Let's try and get that loss off of Pifer's record so that record and resume can look a little bit more polished before we start putting him against better names at middleweight. We move on. Ignacio Bahamandez got a big win against Trey Ogden, and he'll be looking for a jump up a little bit in the lightweight division. I think that jump up should be Mike Davis. Now, this is a no-brainer. Of course, people are going to be like, why not against a really big name like Jim Miller? It's going to be tough to get a Jim Miller to take this type of matchup. If you know how Mike Davis fights, you know why I've made this matchup. He'll be looking for a fight soon. He's incredibly inactive as a fighter. So he'll be looking to come back soon. Bahamandez didn't take any damage in that fight. So let's do Ignacio Bahamandez, Mike Davis. If you know how this fight's going to turn out. That is a guaranteed scrap of a fight. Put it on a good position on a fight night card in July or August, and the winner of it will have a ton of attention behind him. That's what you need to do. Bahamandez, Mike Davis. Mike Davis, he won the trials at Tiger Muay Thai a long time ago, got the right to stay there and be trained there for a few years. Very, very good striker. Let's do him versus Bahamandez. The winner of that, ton of hype behind him, can then go on to fight some big names just outside the rankings in the lightweight division. Make it happen. Bahamandez, Davis. That's all the fights I want to see made next. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye.